Welcome to Module 5, Determining a Student Growth Rating and Preparing for the Summative Conference. For information regarding rubrics for determining the rating for the student growth portion, please see Exhibit F in the Valley View School District Educator Evaluation Plan. This is a copy of just the student growth data portion of the student growth portion of the educator evaluation. When looking at the data and determining your rating based on the data, this is the percentage of students needing to meet their growth goals set by the educator to rate a specific level of performance. In other words, if 80 to 100% of the students in your population meet their growth goal, you would receive an excellent rating for that particular growth goal. If 60 to 79% of students meet that growth goal, you would receive a proficient rating for that particular student growth goal, and so on. So let's look at an example and determine the rating for this particular educator. This educator has an assessment that was worth 100 points. When he or she did the pre-assessment, they collected the baseline data and they categorized it according to student performance. So there are 4 categories of students here in this tiered example. Tier A students scored initially 0 to 20 points. That was 6 students receiving that score. In Tier B, 10 students scored between 21 and 40 points initially on the pre-assessment. In Tier C, 4 students scored between 41 and 50 points. And in Group D, 2 students scored more than 50 points on the pre-assessment. So the educator set the growth target as follows. Those Group A students, he or she was expecting to grow 30 points or more at the time of the post-assessment. Group B was expected to grow 40 points or more at the time of post-assessment. Group C, 20 points or more. And Group D was expected to grow a minimum of 15 points plus growth based on a capstone target. When the educator actually completed the post-assessment, you can see in red what the results were. In that Group A, those 6 students, 4 students grew 30 points or more. 2 students grew, though, between 21 and 28 points. In Group B, 6 grew 40 points or more. 3 grew 30 to 39 points, and 1 grew 27 points. Group C, 4 students grew 20 points or more, so all 4 students. And in Group D, 2 students grew more than the 15 points, but only 1 completed the capstone activity with proficiency. So in summary, 4 out of the 6 students in Tier A met their target, 6 out of 10 students in Tier B met their target, 4 out of 4 students in Tier C met their target, and 1 out of 2 students in Tier D met their target because of the capstone. This means that 15 out of the 22 students in this particular educator's population met their target, or 68% of the class. The rating for this teacher for this particular student growth goal would be proficient. This is one area that you will be collecting evidence for, along with other artifacts that are specified in the Exhibit F for the professional practice side of the student growth. But let's talk about preparing for this summative conference. When preparing for your summative conference, review the various artifacts that show the rationale that you used in determining your goals, the strategy that you use to both monitor and instruct students to proficiency and growth, and reflections on the student growth goal you set. What evidence do you want to share with your evaluator? And how might you prepare for a summative conference at the end of your evaluation cycle? The following are some videos from the AFT that show an educator and an evaluator preparing for the summative conference. First is the educator, then is the evaluator, And the final video shows the two of them meeting together to talk about the educator's SLO.
Okay, so I have my summative conference with my principal this afternoon, and before I meet with Lynn, let's see, what do I want to take with me? Well, I definitely want to look over my data one more time, and I've submitted everything to her, and it's all on the computer, so she has been able to look at that. I have my overall fall, January, and spring data here. I have the test scores, so if she wants to look at the test scores, I have that. I have my SLO stuff and all of my justification, because I think I'm highly effective, so my justification is here with the supporting data for that, with the rubric. I think I'll bring over here maybe this student data with me, with the rubric, just to show that I'm also using a different rubric to validate my other scores. So I think I'm ready. I think she has everything that she needs. I think I'm prepared to make my case to be highly effective.
Now watch as the evaluator prepares for the SLO or summative conference.
Okay, so next up I'm going to be meeting with Kathy. She's a first grade teacher, and we're going to start with SLO, so I need to make sure that I really take a good look here and remind myself about the SLO that she set. I remember that she tiered it, so I just want to check and make sure I keep that in mind, that she had her groups set. And I do see here I made a note that we met mid-year and we had to revise those targets, so I'm going to have to make sure I ask her about how that revision went. And she sent me her data. Everything looks great. I know she gave me everything that I needed on time, so I had time to review it, which is great because that's really important that I get a chance to look at it before we meet and we can have a really good conversation. So it looks here like she gave me her students' individual data. She's got some samples of her student work. And I'll make sure that I ask her about those tiers and find out if she ended up determining by student level each of her children and whether they met that SLO or not. So I think we're in really good shape. I'll talk to her about that. We'll make sure we go over her professional practice, and I think it'll be a really good conversation.
Finally, watch these educators discuss the SLOs at the summative conference. What word or words would you use to describe the educator and her stance during this conference, the evaluator and her stance during this conference?
Hi, Kathy. I can't
Hi.
believe it's the end of the year already.
I know.
We're here ready to do your summative conference, and there's a lot to cover, I know, but I was thinking we should start with your student learning objectives.
Okay.
Okay, so I've gone over all of the data that you sent me. I know you said you had some individual student data you wanted to share as well, so that we could determine your rating, but we can go over that together.
Okay.
Okay.
So just as a reminder, I'm sure you've looked at it all. I did my SLO. This SLO is about student spelling scores. I really wanted to make sure that I had a way of using some data to look at student spelling, and I had read some research that student spelling scores will positively impact their reading and writing score, their reading levels as well. So that's why I did this. So what I did was I collected some data, as you can obviously see right there, about my students. I did the PALS test, which is a district level assessment on our students, and that also gave me their reading level, so I could compare their spelling scores and their reading levels.
And you did that right at the beginning of the school year.
Did it right in fall, yeah, in fall. And then I did it for the purposes of my SLO. I did it 3 times. I have 3 pieces of data points here, so fall and then January and spring. Although between the fall and January, I did do the assessments kind of in the middle of that, just to check. I'm in the, as you know, I'm in the inclusion classroom, so I have some students that are struggling, and I really wanted to make sure that the tiers and targets that I had set for those students, that we were right on.
I think I remember too, when we met mid-year, didn't you make an adjustment to your tiers?
I did.
A little bit
Some of those students were not progressing as far along as I thought I wanted them to, so after meeting with the reading teacher and looking at this data some more, we decided that maybe we should adjust those targets a little bit. So, and then I met with you, and we did adjust those targets mid-year just a little bit, just to reflect really what they were doing, and then project out for what they would do by the end of the year. So based on the data that I collected for the year, I think you can see clearly that I exceeded my SLO. What I really wanted, if you looked at my initial targets, I really wanted my students to make sure that they would go up. My highest students would go up at least 3 reading levels, and all of my high students did go up their 3 reading levels. I wanted my middle group of students to go up at least 2 reading levels, and they absolutely did that.
And that was pretty rigorous for those kids.
That was pretty rigorous for those kids. I think so too. The last group was my at-risk kids, some of my inclusion kids, plus a few of my other kids that are in the classroom that are at risk. Those kids did meet the modified target after we revised that target in mid-year. Those students did meet that target. So overall, the rubric says here that all or most of the students met the target. All of my students met their targets. Then it says many students exceed the targets, and most of my students did. The calculation we were using is that at least 85% of the kids would exceed the target, and I had 87% or more. I think it was about 87% that exceeded the target. So I believe that I'm highly effective in this area, that my SLO shows that. If you had any other questions.
No, I actually love the way that you broke this down. It was very easy for me to follow because I see that you broke this down and you really looked at individual students, because as we talked about at the beginning, sometimes people just think about numbers and percentages and they forget that the student learning objectives are written about the children that they have in front of them. So I love the way that you broke this down by each child. I can easily see the data that you have here, and you've really summarized by saying at the student level whether they met or exceeded. And I can tell that you really, your students did exceed, and I completely agree that your rating on this SLO will be an exceeded. So I'll make sure that I enter that.
Okay.
And we're going to go on and talk about your math SLO in just a minute, but I just want to make sure that we come back, since this summative conference is really talking about every piece of your evaluation. When we talk about your professional practice, I'd really like us to kind of bring this back and talk about what you did in the classroom. I saw, came into your room several times and collected some great evidence of everything that you were doing. But I want to make sure we don't forget to draw some connections, because obviously what you were doing in the classroom directly impacted the success that your kids had. So
yeah, right. Well, I like data. You know I like data. So I took the data on my students, and the data is supposed to inform instruction. So as I went along, I was looking at this. That's why I had to take those students that were at risk and kind of reassess them in between, because I didn't think that they were going where they wanted to. So looking at that data, that really informed my instruction and helped me really think about other ways of teaching the spelling that would help my students. And one of the other things that I used, which is not really part of this data, but for my professional practice, is the Common Core writing assessment for grade 1. There's a rubric included in the Common Core that I was using with my students. And so I had some writing samples that I used with the students, and I looked at what they were doing in September, and I scored it based on the Common Core rubric. And then I looked at their May and scored that on the Common Core rubric. That supported, this piece of student work supported the evidence that was over here on the data.
all right, great. So can we move on to your math SLO?
Sure.
All right, great. Let's take a look at that.
Okay.
In summary, you, the educator, are in charge of the student growth evidence for your evaluation. Educators are encouraged to work in teams. Educators are encouraged to make things manageable, especially during this first year of implementation. Educators and evaluators will be learning side by side throughout this first year of implementation and beyond. And when student growth is a meaningful focus of team discussions and reflective practice, it can lead to increased student outcomes. Thanks for your participation during these 5 modules regarding Type 3, SLOs, and the student growth portion of the evaluation.